Okay, give it a few minutes. Good thing I'm in Haytna Village. Fucking monsters be damned! There it is. Damn it, Twitch. Yeah. I think I got it working. Thank you for joining. I think I'm gonna call this one the Mother's Day special. Or just Mother's Day stream or something. I don't know. Oh shoot, what was this called? I think I edited the stream itself. Okay, Breath of the Wild, chill. Never mind, I'll leave it like that and edit later. I'm glad you can edit later. Where was I? Okay, if I remember correctly... I think I did the main thing that usually is good. So, you know what, I'll leave the horse there. And I'll do shrines, because I still need to open this area up. You know there's one up here, so I'll get that. You know what I forgot to deal with my corn? Salt it. Really? Oh, at least it's got butter in it. Mm-hmm. I forgot ketchup on my hot dog. Oh well. You know, Mama, I'm glad I know how to help us with our sinuses because I feel a hell of a lot better. Not great, but I can actually, my nose doesn't feel so clogged. How are you feeling? How's your throat? Use these things. This one I use. Hello! Sorry, I didn't see it until just now. How is your day been? Maybe I should put an indicator. Ah, I don't have a sword. They don't have a weapon. Kaboom. It's like, what am I doing? Grabbing another weapon. Traveler's sword. It is pink. What'd you do for Mother's Day? Aha, I got away. Ding! If I had the money, I would have took Mom somewhere too. I was gonna barbecue, but the barbecue failed because I couldn't find the coal. Found the coal just as I was gonna start the other cooking. Well, just as I started cooking. Buzzing. Oh. Like, what are you doing? It was bothering me while I'm streaming. Oh, no, I was wanting a different... I mean, I don't mind the long length, but... I missed him! He moved! The runaway arrow. It is over here, but I gotta go over here. No, move the indicator. Delete. Okay, yep. I'm in the right course. Fine, run off. I'll do this far off later. Hot. I've done this. I just realized I didn't change. Ah! Is it raining? It's raining. Damn it. No wonder I fell. Am I going in the right direction? I know where it's supposed to be, but... Okay. I found it! And it's ringing, and I need over there. Well, I am... Let's do this again. I do not have enough stamina for that. Okay, whatever. Round 2. Let's see if I can get this. One thing about this streaming thing, OBS, can't tell how many people are on. Okay, I'm going the direction that I went. Hold up, wait a minute. Why do I always miss them? Yeah, I know what's over here. Shut up. Damn it, he moved again too. was like 3 of them. One was running though. Ah! Okay. I ran out of stamina, but that was pure luck right there. Nope. Oh, that's why. I'm at the upper area of the thing. What is taupe? Every time I hear these stuff on DIY stuff, I'm like, what? Three boxes. Oh, wrong. Oh. Nope, not bombs. Nice. Kind of funny. That ice you can stick on. Other ones, you're foul. Ooh, that one's about to fall. Ooh, I got it. Zora sword. Ah, no, I did not want to. Okay, I guess I'm swimming. Some swimming. I was gonna try to do the ice, but works just as well. I'm gonna try to make it easier on myself. Oh! I just dumped that other one over. See? I was trying to double jump to where I can frickin'... That's what I was trying to do. My usual flyover. Oh, and it went up. Wait, I'm sorry. No, that's perfect. In all actuality, I'm glad I didn't get to barbecue. I'm sad that I couldn't, but I just not realizing how much clouding up. May the goddess smile upon me and laugh at my randomness. And I'm glad I don't have a microphone near my mouth. I'm glad the mic on here don't pick me up. I mean, it picks me up, but it picks up when I'm talking. Didn't want to be the rude one when there was remember when Alice had the mic on? I was always worried that they'd hear me when we were eating. Ugh. Wink. I remember correctly, the other one is right. Hope I have that location right. Then there was one in here somewhere. Was it in here? No. Over here. Yay, it's not raining. Okay. Good stuff. And okay. A little hot. Fall down there. I'm not doing that. I'll let it go for now. Wait, I can. Yeah. Oh, missed one. Some meat, wheat, some rice. I'm getting crickets. There it is. One thing I hate about this. Oh. That's the only way you can get the Hylian rice is fucking chopping the grass. See how much I can get before I go. Oh! How much do I have? 10. Okay, I think I'm done with that. I'm getting bored with it. I know I need supplies, but... Oh, shoot. Before I start this, I need to talk to the professor or read his diary. One of the two. Either way, I still have to run around. It's so raining. On the road again. Can't believe. Wait. Am I going? Yeah, it is. God damn it. Forgot. This is why I always had the horse. Why didn't it do that? Oh well. What time of day is it? 7 a.m. This should be walking over. Hello, sir.
Oh,
Ah, let me guess. You caught wind of the great Dr. Collapse? Again, I'm not very good with the names. Groundbreaking research and had to meet me yourself, huh? No? Don't tell me you're never heard of me after I've dedicated my life to researching the ancient shrines. Hi. Well, you'd better remember my name if it's not the least you'll hear of it.
ah,
And while I'm at it, it's Dr. Lip Pop. I'm not good with word names. If you please. I don't study my rear end off to be called Mr. whatever his name is. Everyone forgets a doctor. I'm a doctor for some reason.
ah.
Probably because you don't look. Since you asked, I'll inform you that I'm engaged in analyzing ancient texts. I haven't time to idle chit chat. Ancient text.
Hmm.
Soon my long years of research will be revealed, and all the world will hail it as the discovery of the century. To prove any undoubt attention, I haven't even told my family about my work. You understand? I'm sure.
Ha.
I did hear you just say doctor, as in not merely but doctor. The roll It rolls off your tongue so naturally. It was downright salary. Salary? This changes things.
Oh.
Very well then. I'm feeling charitable, so I'll let you follow things. Oh, a few things slip. This is just between us, understand? When a dark light resides in the cursed statue's eyes, pierce its gaze to plague the seal from the shrine.
Ah.
I'm still in the process of depicting descriptive that one word. That's one. So I don't suppose there's any harm in sharing it with you. That's my life in a nutshell. Days filled with researching shrines and nights spent studying ancient text. That leaves no time to convey with passing strangers, so farewell. Rude! Okay, bye. Oh, stupid door. And there's a monster. Be gone! Did I? I don't know. Whatever. 7 a.m. Dang it! 7 a.m. Leave that fire pit. No! It's burnt out. I gotta wait. Oh, surprisingly it's there. Still night. Hell? Oh, that thing. Stop hearing the damn thing. I didn't plan to hit that one, but okay. Oh, our sword is the same. Forgot, is it right at midnight or does it have to be just dark? Its eyes, it glows. I broke the button! Oh. Oops. Trial of the coffee. Oh, this fun one. Ooh, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall, don't fall. Okay. Fall. Stop. 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 Why are you still wiggling? I said stop. Why do you insist on moving? Seriously. Come on, kids. Finally! During stasis. The other one is no, no, no! Please! What did I do? I don't know what I did, but okay. That works. I don't know. Glitched. I was hoping to climb up the glitch. Right round. Nope! God fucking damn it! Sometimes I hate this game. Other times I love it. Right now, my timing is shit. My timing is so much shit right now. You know what? Let's go back over here. Maybe it will help again. Hopefully this time I'll get the stupid thing. Stop. Finally. Seriously? You know what? Now this is the interesting part I love to do. Oh, 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 oh. Okay, okay. I got it. 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 This is I love it, but also hate it. Because if you don't do it right, da 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 da, and run. Okay, jump, but still. Hmm. How many do I have now? 5. Okay. I was ready to go. Why are you taking so long to load? What the hell? No. I mean, it probably was letting me eat. I mean, I was close on that part. Okay. Um, I know there's one up here. Not right there, but just right by the goddess statue. Or at least the entrance is. I don't have anything for these, so I'm gonna have to just mark them right now. Hate to do it, but go back over here. If you're getting a soda, can I have one too, please? Ugh, I need one, but I have to. Okay, you know what? The stable first, and then. Quickly, I just walk along this. I mean, I could have. What'd you forget now that I noticed that you went back there? I was checking my phone. I have to charge my tablet. So you put your tablet on the bed for the moment, and then plugged it in, right? Mm. Okay. don't see me. Huh? Wanna do digging down? Oh shit! I thought I plugged it in. You haven't watched that in a while. Oh, bless you. He does look Don't get curious. Uh-oh. There it is. It was here somewhere. And it's right by this ball. Riverside Stable. Oh yeah, this the books for the EX stuff too. Completely forgot about that. Then, then again, I'm so used to grabbing the EX, knowing where most of them are. I think this was Freacorn. Yep, metal connection. There it is. ended. That didn't work. I had it too close. And I'm knocking it down. I was gonna go in the front, but I'll do this one. Paper. Uh-oh. It freeze. Crap, I think I froze. Audio and everything's working, but the video. Crab, you still there? Is the picture frozen? Because right now I'm climbing the thing, but on the stream, or at least on the OBS. I think the video froze. Yeah, the video froze. God damn it. That is so weird. Okay, I think I got it back. Okay, that's all I had to do. I hated to do that, but it stupid technical difficulty, goddamn motherfucker. May the goddess smile upon you. Then finish the salad. Alright. It just shows that you loved it. I'll put that on there. Yeah. Okay, I got that one. I hate to do it. I'm up to jump from the plateau. Oh, you're playing with. You know what? Let's get the flip. I get the stable for that, or I got this far and I just now realized, crap. You know what? F it. I know where most of these memories are anyway. Oh, and I missed because they saw me. Wait, wasn't it right here? Nice. Dang it. Mm. And, here is the stupid memory. Right here. Oh, I was close. I just okay. And memory.
From here, we'll make our way to Goron City. Then, we'll need some adjustments on that divine beast so Daru can manage it as easily as possible. He's figured out how to get it to move. However, it's apparent that we still have much more to learn. But to think that divine beast was actually built by people. That means we should be able to understand how it works and how to use it to our advantage. These divine beasts, so much we don't know. But if we want to turn back Calamity Ganon, they're our best hope. Tell me the truth. How proficient are you right now wielding that sword on your back? Legend says that an ancient voice resonates inside it. Can you hear it yet, hero?
He came back to us. Okay, what is that? Your computer has... What is... Is that like a studio recording thing? I mean, streaming? I might be tech savvy and somewhat computer savvy, but I'm not that great at... Oh! What's it? You mean your computer has really good graphics then, or? Don't ask where I'm going, I'm lost. Surprise, bitch. Oh. No. Computer? Laptop? Let's not... OBS, let's work nicely. You've been doing it for the past 3 times. Oh. How did I scare the stupid firefly? I wasn't even going that fast. Dang it, it hurt me. Scare the horses. Oogie boogie boo. There it is. Mom, I forgot to mention in Tears of the Kingdom, you can go down wells now. Remember I'd find a well and I'd try go in it and there was nothing in there? In Tears of the Kingdom, you can go down the wells now. I just now thought of it. The computer has to have a good graphics if it's gonna be playing games. I mean, it's good for like, probably really good for like stream? Is that what that was? Yeah, it's probably good for that stream or whatever. You know what? For once, I'm not gonna help those guys. I'm on a mission. Stomp on me, yeah, right. Haha, I don't have enough. I'm about to turn the damn sensor off. Oh, I hit this one. Yes, there are shrines I love and shrines I hate. It didn't even go down very well. I didn't even know those had holes. Well, that's what happens when I don't look where the fuck I'm going. Seriously, those had holes? Wow. I learned something new each day. Here, I thought I knew Breath of the Wild. Good to know. So that means that one down there. That means that one's the same way. Hurry before it comes at me. Nice try. Really? Now I get the good stuff? Broadsword. Sorry, axe. Go on. The fact that I have to go in a circle. Next time I should look up a thing. Really? You know what? Whatever. That can. Whoa! I almost fell. Oh, I gotta. I've had enough oomph, apparently not. I gotta go do this. Yeah. Gotta do it myself. Ah! My bad. I thought I had it all. So light this. Drop that. It worked. Oh yeah. Hold on. Good. Oh, and I'm breaking the sword. Forget how fast these things break. Oh! I wasn't standing on the platform. Oops. Oops. Okay, one more time. Freaking sunburnt. Okay, not really sunburnt. Oh. Either go to spider point. Seven. I need one more to make it 8. That'd be 2 heart pieces. If I can find a way to get 5 more shrines, I can easily get 2 heart pieces and 1 stamina. This seems to be always the easiest one to get to, but also the hardest one. Oh, no. Let's not. Can I get to the thing? Can I get to the thing? Can I get to the thing? Please tell me I can get to it. I found a perfect area to go straight flying into it. Nice. Where is it? Where is it? I know it can see me. Okay. No one's gonna see me on this side, so let's... Who are they singing happy birthday for? Oh. Oh, shit! Oh my god! I survived! Barely! Oh, are you gonna make it? Right, I got this far. Okay. I got it. Nope, I don't got it. Where's that other one? Where's the other fucker? Right there. God damn it. I'm right in his view. I made it. I made it. Oh, Jesus Christ. Thank you, Ledge. Oh my god. I'm almost there. I'm almost fucking there. I got shot at twice. It's my food. Oh, that should do. This is why I need more health bars. Okay. You shouldn't get me in here. Yay! I made it! I hate this tower. If it wasn't for that damn ledge, I probably would have fallen right back down to the bottom and been shot at like 20 times. What? Yeah, they got several games. The app will tell you when the next game is. Next games. Us or them? Oh, keep it going. I didn't know you. Uh-huh. Ah! Stream, OBS, don't. Thank you. I seriously need to invest in that. Something here. It's a thing right here. It's here. Be on the other side though. You know what? I'm close to. No, that one's what's her name's thing. Over here somewhere, so for star, because I don't know whereabouts it is. Someone's in there. Over this way. Hello, thank you for joining the stream. Yeah, where? Birds, 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 birds. I don't want the recipe for that yet. Where's the artist? Thought he was out here. Oh, oh, I'm gonna go through this fast because this is just EX stuff. Dining hall. Oh, this is the real thing. Okay. Oh, trying to get comfy. Trying to get comfy. You know what? Let's do it. I'm gonna horse over here.
Oh.
Big horse. Yes.
Hmm? Oh. Ah. Or she's gonna be mad because she freaked out.
Rude. You're the one that's fucking whatever woman. Maybe next time I'm gonna talk to her. There was a right there. I can't get to it. Get one of those characters that instantly die. It's like, I didn't even battle. I didn't even. Alright. Of course, I had to break that, apparently. Oops. Not what I wanted. Okay. Boomerang. Oh, boomerang sword.
Ah!
The result of your thinking. Ooh, pie, cake. I'm gonna have to figure out what the recipe is. Suppose, not even in the settlements. Over my training, beloved. Okay. Okay, you rewarded me, so I'm not talking to your wife. Rita and the art dude. First, I think I'm singing the tune wrong. Oh. Thought I was in the middle of a stupid thing. water. Water! What are you doing? Years of experience. Ah! Talk about years of experience, yet I still fuck up. Aww. Surprised I didn't do that before on the other one. Oh crap. And well, like parts. Link diving in water where we don't need to. Another broadsword? You know what? What do I have? Yeah, I don't want this thing. No! 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 Okay. That kind of helped. But now I'm stuck. Okay. You know what? Down the waterfall I go! Goodbye, cruel world! Oh. No! God damn it, Link! Lucky these here. punched up. You know what? I wonder if I could do it from right here. Never mind. I don't need that thing. Oh my god. I can't believe myself. All this time I've been using the stupid raft. I didn't need the stupid raft. Okay, that's two. Me. Okay. So I need 4 more shrines. I can get one by the tower. I could get the other one. Oh, I need 4. I need 4 more shrines. Trying to think of how many shrines. Ow. I guess twitching my toe a specific way will hurt my ankle. I only got 9 Korok. I haven't really been looking at the Koroks. Koroks are too much. 999. Worse than counting the bottles on the wall. Look at this one. That's a. You know what? Let's do it. Let's get that one right there. Back up here. That was me. Oh, I didn't want it to go down, but okay. I was gonna say Happy Mother's Day, but whatever. I don't think I could make it. See if I could get close to it and then stream. No, OBS, OBS. Thank you, OBS. I feel like I am talking to an actual thing every time it does that. Bats! Get away from me. Get away from me. Get away from me. Stop following me! Nope. OBS. Okay. Save in case. I haven't saved in a while. I gotta remember to do that. Are you kidding me? OBS. I seriously need to invest in a computer. before the lizard finds me. Hurry! Open the door! Open the door! Open the door! Open the door! I know it spotted me. I know it spotted me. Yep, it spotted me. Bye. I seen its weapon thingy in the corner
Really?
at the bottom of the screen.
Uh,
It kind of jolted. I was like, it saw me! It saw me! I offer this trial. Where's the stupid thing? There we go. Up, 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 up. Oh, oh. Don't drop on me! Okay. I thought this thing was gonna drop on me. That thing's metal. I had to take the stupid thing. OBS, stop. Work right, OBS. What did I do with it? I know what, oh, it's right down there. I'm carrying a big metal bowl. Because I need it for this challenge. God damn it. Oh, damn it! Can't freaking help either. Come on. Come on. Oh. You know what? I should have just grabbed it and tossed it. And nope. Oh. Okay, right there. Did it not? No, it didn't. Oh, why did I jump in? There was something else on the other side. Let's do it. And then Caesar's Doomsday War. I just got this thing. All of this. You know what? I just gotta remember there's a weapon. I never remember there's weapons in some of these things. But I should remember there's weapons. Oh. Tab, you still there? Ow. Next one is somewhere over here. I swear there was more shrines on this side. There was one right here. And one around here. Can't get to those because those are right by the castle. I mean, I could get that flower one. Yeah, I might get that one. Yeah, there's a thing right here, isn't there? Okay, first things first. Let's see. Okay, so if I get that flower one, and then I get what one was it again? Okay, so the flower one, that way over here, get this one. Is there a? I think there's a. No, there's not one on that side. That's. I could try for those two. So that one and that one, and then there's another shrine here. Okay. I get a right angle while this stuff helps me. There we go.
Huh?
Oh, you're the guy who found the Great Fairy. Funny running into you here. Are you traveling too? No. Ah, OBS. Crap. Nope, that didn't work. Oh my god, OBS. I am so sorry. Hold on. Let me get this up and running again. Freaking A. It froze again. It has audio. There we go. It has audio, but the freaking thing froze. So they didn't see the first part of the talking to this guy. All it did was run up to him. I'm traveling all over the world, so I'm happy to tell you about new places if you want. If you have a picture to show me, let's see it already. And album. That forest, I got that feeling I've seen it before. Can't say for certain, but I believe this might depict the forest just south from here. No, wait. Maybe it's the forest on the other side of the river, northeast of the bottomless swamp. I was ready to say bottomless pit. Oh my god. I went for a stroll around that there recently, and I felt like I may have seen a view like that. Okay, thank you. Rito dude, talk to me. Wait, when he's at the stables, he tells me about. You know what? Let's do it.
Oh.
Greetings, traveler. How about a song?
Oh.
That there on your hip. No, I'm sorry. It's nothing. I don't mean to pry. Eh, no worries. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Kate Cass. I'm a bard traveling this land in search of ancient songs. Have you heard of the ancient song of Hyrule? Ancient song.
Oh.
Ancient songs that sing the praises of a hero who beat back the calamity in an age past. One of the most famous song among them recorded recounts the events of 10,000 years ago. I am not able to read. It happened to know a song about the ancient hero. It was passed down to me by my teacher. Do you care to hear it? Let's hear it.
Oh.
Excellent. Without further ado. Yep, this is that 100-year-old story thing. I knew it. That's what he talked about. Yeah, so anytime he's at the stables, don't talk to him. Thank you for doing that. hmm You know what? Next time I need the bathroom, maybe I'll get him to sing that. Can't remember how long these things are. I'm not even gonna read it because it was told like 3 times already now. Technically 2. realize how dark I got. Thanks for listening. Please come back to hear it again sometime. Yeah, when I need a break. Need something to entertain people. Okay, oh yeah, that's what I was doing. I was like, what am I doing?
Yep.
She's already knocked out. Yes, for that I didn't cover in time.
Yep.
Like, you know there's dangers in going to places, especially when you're unarmed. Oh shoot! I think I went the wrong way. Yes, I did go the wrong way. This trail. This trail. Tree branch. No, OBS, please. Perfect time to do the setting. OBS. Oh, who is that? It came at me. Happy Mother's Day. Yeah, most likely. Yeah.
How did it come to this? The divine beasts, the guardians, they've all turned against us. It was Calamity Ganon. It turned them all against us. And everyone, Mifa, Urbosa, Rivali and Daruk, they're all trapped inside those things. It's all my fault. Our only hope for defeating Ganon is lost, all because I couldn't harness this cursed power. Everything I've done up until now, it was all for nothing. So I really am just a failure. All my friends, the entire kingdom, my father most of all. I tried and I failed them all. I left them all die.
That scene always makes me sad. Oh, yes. We just title this OPS Don't on YouTube. I swear that's all I've been saying is telling OBS to stop. Just keep streaming, OBS. Keep streaming. What was that? Okay, right there. There's the horse. OBS. Matt. My shoot. Can't change either. My internet's starting to mess up. Yeah. That's probably why there it goes again. OBS messes up because the gigabytes go down. Well, it's 8 o'clock. Crap. I might have to end it. I don't want to though. If it keeps. I'll keep going and see what happens. Aha. No, I caught the monster in the lake or river thing. Oops, sorry. Okay. You're gonna stay right there. I'm gonna be up here as much as possible. All I can say is I hope I can swim. My stamina might not be too much. I should have put some stamina stuff. Froggy. Froggy. I made it. Stop peeping at me. Okay, Doctor. Aren't they lovely? I wanted to see how the shrine would look with flowers around it. No, internet. Internet. Internet and OBS, please don't act up. And it's wonderful. Please, feel free to take a closer look. Just don't step on them. I'll step on them all I want! No, she's gonna get mad at me and then kick me back to the beginning of this thing. Okay, I'm getting tired of that damn thing. Shut up! I'm right beside the damn shrine. Oh, I can't go that way. I almost thought I could. There's flowers there. Damn it. pokey things. That way I don't have to worry about it. You know what? I'm not gonna worry about that thing down there. Let's go this way. If I get this right, Copious. See, there's a hardy fruit right there, but can't get to it, because if I get to it, then there's going to be a big blob, and then I'm going to accidentally, every time I always accidentally touch the stupid flowers, then she gets mad at me. Ah, I almost touched him. Oh my god. Uh-oh. Wonder if there's a way to stop and then... or... Oh! Yeah, when I get a chance, June, I'm gonna see if I can find a way to cancel the internet. Yeah, I'm gonna cancel the internet that we have and go for a better company because I'm tired of this. It went down again and then it came back up, and it's probably because of whoever's online on the satellite thing. Whereas that Starlink, I mean, even with how many freaking, I mean, the tribe has like how many freaking buildings with Starlink, and it works perfectly fine. So I'd rather do that than, I was liking Viasat, but I'm not liking Viasat anymore. I can't game. I mean, I can game, but I can't stream game. I'm getting tired of the... I'm getting tired of the lag. Why are you taking so long to get over here, treasure chest? Ew! Oh, that was close. It didn't catch fire. Oh. Ah! No! Link! I don't want the letter! Thank you. I... Yeah, I think I might... Oh, it's in the water. Okay, so I gotta make sure it's not in the water. It is going around this thing, right? Yep. Nope, that didn't work. Oh, I think I'm too close to this. Crap. Let's try it. Ugh. Okay, there we go. A little longer and then I'm gonna end the stream only because Internet's being stupid. Same thing with the OBS and laptop. Oh, I touched it. Oh, I was wanting out of the damn thing anyway. I don't have a Korok. I'm almost doing straight. Wow. Oh my god, I can't believe I made it across like that. Forgot what was in there. Okay, and I said the other one was where? Oh. You know what? Let's take a horse. Internet. Oh, whoopsie. Sorry, horse. I ran the horse into the tree. Oops. Where am I? I'll go left. Wait, if I remember correctly, was there a chest there? I gotta look at the logs again. You know what? I'm gonna be nice. I don't think I've ever gotten a curry before. That's new. Why did that scared of that thing? Horse, where'd you go? There. Don't damn thing. I don't like those. Throw a Ziga. I don't like the Giga. They're annoying. I mean, they got weapons. I'll run you over. Oh, I thought that was a Giga. Run it over. I should have run. Or it was a bird. I could have got meat. I got it. Oh, sorry. I didn't mean to say beetle. Cheers. Okay, nope, you're not right there. Where are you? There's usually a shrine around here. I hate to, but I'm gonna need it. What the? Ah! Right thought, wrong area. On tiers, well, you go that way to the Great Fairy, which is right there. Oh, I didn't need that mark. Map now. Drop frames. Ah! Fudge face. Oh. Oh crap. Okay. There would have paused this before I. Oh. I forgot the names. Yeah, I'm lagging bad. I know this is gonna kind of fuck up.